Spider-Man No Way Home is the Avengers Endgame equivalent of the Spider-Man franchise. It's a movie filled with fan service, and as such, it elicits pretty similar feelings as Endgame. If you've seen the trailers, you're aware that villains from the other iterations by Sony show up, and if you're not familiar with those characters, well, good luck understanding their motivations. You kind of need to have seen the previous movies to have an appreciation for who they are. But the way Endgame is a love letter to fans who watched over 20 Marvel movies, this movie is for the die-hard Spider-Man fans. At times it's messy and the tone is inconsistent, but what it does well, it does pretty well. The interactions between certain characters is satisfying, and the humor is pretty decent. This is sometimes detrimental to the more mature moments, but it's not that the movie is purposely trying to undercut serious moments with jokes. It's more the case that it's moving too fast and it's trying to do too much that you don't really get time to breathe. And this is pretty much the case up until the last few minutes of the movie when you can finally feel the full weight of the events. The music is awesome, the set pieces are cool, and the villains are stellar. Alfred Molina and Willem Dafoe kill it in their roles, and it's such a treat to see them again. Despite being a little all over the place, it somehow manages to keep things together, but don't expect anything as cohesive as Spider-Man 2 or Homecoming. But if you're a diehard Spider-Man fan, you'll probably love this.
Spoiler time.
Aunt May has a lot more to do in this movie than the previous movies, which was cool. She volunteers and helps people, which ultimately leads to her own demise, ironically, and it gets us the famous Spider-Man line.
But I thought you'd learn the meaning of responsibility.
MJ and Ned aren't as involved in this movie as I would have hoped. At times, they feel more like they're plot devices than the characters that we grew to like in the previous films. Dr. Octopus and Goblin have the most screen presence of the villains, and Osborn is the one really driving the plot forward. Jamie Foxx is charismatic as Electro, but the way that MJ and Ned take a backseat, Sandman and Connors aren't doing a ton either. They're there because it's fan service to have them, and don't get me wrong, their characterizations are done well, it's just they're not doing as much as maybe they could. I will say that it was cool how Sandman showed up because he was actually helping Peter, and it shows us that there's a little more going on than just villains being transported to this universe. And of course, Garfield and Toby are in it. The hype feelings you get in the portal scene and Endgame, you get from their intros. My only problem with their introductions is it comes right after Aunt May dies and Holland is off sulking. We jump from an extremely gut-wrenching scene to, remember these guys? Let's have their interactions for a few minutes. We jump from Aunt May's death to the two Peters and then back to Peter, and it's a little glaring because it interrupts the flow of emotions. But it's forgivable because the two Peters helping our Peter get through Aunt May's death is just, it's done so well. And if this were not a in-game type movie where it's the culmination of many films before it, I don't know that I would be as forgiving. But the movie sets expectations that it's going to be fan service and it delivers.
They love me.
And for me, the most important part of the movie is the ending in the soft reboot that it sets for us. To undo all the damage that he's done, Peter lets Doctor Strange use a spell which makes everyone forget him. Everyone forgets who Peter Parker is. The coolest thing about this ending is that Spider-Man no longer has all these advanced tools to use at his disposal. He now has to make his way through the world just like the average down on his luck kid. And this is the part where the movie becomes a little bit like The Force Awakens for me. Let me explain. That is to say, if the next Spider-Man movie falls flat, or if it undoes the consequences that Peter has to face, I'll retroactively look back on this movie poorly. It's hard to watch The Force Awakens knowing where the story ends up, and there are so many cool avenues this movie opens up, and I hope it doesn't squander them.
I certainly know the consequences of the slightest miscalculation.
And I hope I don't come across as overly critical of the movie because I did love it, and I'm super excited to see where this universe is going to take us to next.